Hello, hello. All right, everyone, come on in, take a seat. We're talking about what will bring DeFi to 1 trillion. This is a revisited topic. We're running it back, talked about this last year, but we want to revisit it and update. A year has passed and have a group of friendly faces up here to talk about it. Perhaps we could start with some introductions. Would you like to start us off?
Thank you, Brandon. I'm Mounir, founder of ParaSwap. It's a middleware for traders and dApps, basically allowing them to access most decentralized liquidity on Ethereum and on Avalanche and other chains.
Hey everybody, Luigi Demeo. I run the DevRel and DeFi teams here at Ava Labs. Also, I'm sure most of you know the Avalanche blockchain if you're here today, so Ava Labs is one of the companies pushing that blockchain forward.
Hey everyone, my name is Alex Szul. I'm one of the co-founders of the Benqi protocol. We do decentralized lending and borrowing on liquidity markets, as well as liquid staking.
Hey guys, my name is Julien Bouteloup. I'm the founder of Stake Capital Group. So we have a few different companies inside the group, such as StakeDAO, asset manager for retail, Rect News, the underlying investigation, dark style type of firm. We also have Blackpool, real estate, NFT management. We are the biggest player on Sorare, for example. And we also have the quantitative algorithmic trading aspect of the group, plus the investment to a family office. And I'm also involved in curve finance.
Beautiful. And yeah, just briefly, I'm Brandon. I'm with Framework Ventures, and we're an early stage venture firm focused entirely on crypto. All right, gents. Well, I'd love to start us off with, frankly, just kind of drawing a distinction between TradFi and DeFi and getting a temperature check on your opinion as to where do we stand as it relates to maybe infrastructure, features, user adoption. Perhaps a more pointed question is, what exists in TradFi that does not yet exist in DeFi?
That's a good question. And I think it's something that a lot of people who enter the DeFi space should understand, is that there are a couple key facets of TradFi that have yet to kind of migrate into the decentralized finance space. I think one of the first ones are actually robust consumer protection measures. You know, if somebody scams you or somebody commits fraud in the traditional financial space, you can, with a safe margin, get your money back, ideally. In DeFi, if you get rugged, as it happens almost on a weekly basis across some ecosystem in the space, that kind of safety isn't there yet. The second one I would say that's pretty clear is a lack of wholesale adoption by centralized institutions like treasuries, Federal Reserve groups that really support banks and centralized financial institutions, and we have yet to see that kind of support for decentralized finance groups.
But I think also what is interesting is that now we're comparing TradFi to DeFi, not to crypto. This was the case a few years ago, so I think we made a lot of progress. And in terms of user protection, as you said, I think we're not matching the legal enforcement that we would have in TradFi, but we are, since we don't have this luxury, if we call it so, we are forced to find technological solutions. So now things like account abstractions, social recovery, and all of those are one of the, at least the path forward in order to have a matching, I would say, solution to those problems. We're not there yet, but I think we reach at least critical mass that allow us to go after the next billion users, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think for me, TradFi provides a lot of infrastructure that was legacy in a lot of ways, and DeFi was sort of spun out as something that could whether replace it or sort of sit on the side of it. It's kind of interesting. It's a permissionless, open way of doing finance, and that never existed with TradFi in any way. So from that perspective, I think it's added a lot of value to the world. Very small, I guess, user base, you could say. And I guess the way I see this playing out over time is that DeFi can actually provide building blocks to augment or improve traditional finance in a lot of ways. So there's no reason that you couldn't use smart contracts in a regulated, permission environment and have that be the new TradFi. That doesn't mean that permissionless open DeFi can't also exist. It's just that there's going to be these two different, regimes, in my opinion, going forward. But I think the technology in general is just way superior to then all the things that exist in TradFi right now. And because all the legacy players in TradFi have so many systems that have been, I guess, band-aided and patched together for the last 40 years, it's very difficult to upgrade that infrastructure from within. And it's probably a better solution to actually adopt something, a completely new framework. And smart contracts and blockchains can provide that.
Yeah, it's interesting because we are living in our own bubble, believing that DeFi has been providing a huge amount of solutions and benefits to society, which I think is not actually the case. It's only for 0.0% of the worldwide populations. So on the minimum spectrum, DeFi hasn't really changed the world in society yet. What I believe is when those big traditional financial institutions and big players like banking side will start adopting the DeFi tools, then this is where it will benefit a large amount of people worldwide. Because if you think about it, only a few people, us, are having access to those type of solutions. Yes, some people in remittance and being able to send money across countries, but on a large scale, it's a small amount of people worldwide. So I'm really looking into how traditional finance and centralized authority start by nature and being enforced to use those different solutions, because we don't want to see the collapse of the financial world that is happening today again and again, over and over. So at some point, they will need to have kind of concept of transparency, plus being able to offer those type of technology to everyone in the world, but it's only by adopting those different solutions. But I don't believe DeFi, I think DeFi will not and will never make it bigger than traditional finance. What will happen is DeFi will be used inside traditional finance, like we've seen in internet. So you're using those different protocols, HTTPS, secure transportation of data. It will be the same in traditional finance with account abstraction and secure enclave. Those banking institutions will provide access to, for example, money, but using the tool of blockchain. So in a secure and transparent way. You can leave, you can opt in as you wish without signing either contract. This is where we're moving into, I believe.
Yeah, beautiful. Couldn't agree more. I mean, frankly, TradFi and DeFi are complementary technologies. It's not to draw a distinction and make it PvP, right? I think we're all building towards a similar end state, upgrading the financial rails, that we rely on day to day. User protection, of course, security being top of mind. DeFi to date has, let's just say, struggled in that realm, but I think we have native solutions coming out, TradFi partners, and a whole cohort of individuals targeting these areas. So I think there are a lot of upgrades on the horizon. But rather than get into maybe more of a regulatory discussion, would love to just pose the question of what is unique in DeFi? Like, we've already talked about the distinctions, but what opportunities are there to build in DeFi that do not exist in TradFi, for example? I think the 24/7 nature of the market sort of speaks for themselves. We have structured products like perps, for example, but what is it that's perhaps native to DeFi or on-chain finance, or however you'd like to describe it, that you find the most interesting?
I think the thing that really jumps out, and even when I first got involved in decentralized finance space, that really grabbed my attention, is the concept of disintermediation. That's revolutionary in the financial realm. I mean, if you think about your daily life, there's almost an intermediary for every single thing you do. Every time you swipe your credit card, every time you make a deposit at the bank, anytime that you involve finance in almost any realm, there's somebody in between you and the other person or the other side of that transaction. In decentralized finance, you don't really have that in most cases. I mean, look at the AMM model, for example. It's P2P exchanging through a third party. Granted, there's a third party liquidity pool in that, but it's not like the liquidity provider can take your transaction away from you, assuming the smart contracts are built correctly. And the second one is actually the concept of pseudo-anonymity, where if you told me a couple of years ago you're going to go and transact hundreds or thousands of dollars with people that you've never even seen before, who you don't know their names, their faces, where they're at in the world, and there's going to be nothing except a couple, smart contracts protecting that transaction. I'd say that sounds kind of crazy. But as you learn more about DeFi and on-chain finance, you begin to see that, okay, this is actually happening. And it's, I think Uniswap has in excess of $1 trillion in volume a month already. That's gigantic, considering just how we were talking about how small the DeFi space is overall. So the disintermediation, the pseudo-anonymity are two core concepts that make DeFi what it is. And I'd be very interested to see how Tradfi adapts to that over time.
Yeah, I think for me, there are two things that I think provide a ton of value that just don't exist in TradFi. One being atomic transactions, and two being no intermediaries in between those transactions. That's just two very fundamental points of finance that are just completely missing from TradFi. In TradFi, you need to have somebody in the middle of the transaction who obviously has a lot of power over time, right? Because they're sitting in the middle, they're able to charge fees, they're able to censor, they're able to do all these types of things that make the business relationship not very fruitful for both sides over time. And without atomic transactions, you just have settlement times which lead to fails and failure to deliver on different types of securities or assets, which is operational overhead. And those two things combined lead to a very archaic system. I was actually on a panel recently at an event in Italy with none other than Nouriel Rubini, who actually had a lot of points on how the whole system doesn't really upgrade this. And we actually had a very good debate about some of the upgrades that are possible with those two specific points being mentioned. And those can happen still in a compliant way. They don't need to be, it doesn't need to be this all or nothing environment, which is, completely open and permissionless, no censorship, no KYC, nothing, or complete KYC and censorship. So I think we can build two different paths, and I think those are the two building blocks that allow for that to happen.
I think it adds also optionality, so we can still have intermediaries for users who don't want to go do the extra mile of understanding how the technology works, but it's not the same kind of intermediaries there. We don't have no choice at all, and they are indispensable. We cannot do otherwise. So now we can choose to do it ourselves, including going directly on-chain into the smart contract, which we agree only a very small set of us can do. But yeah, I think the optionality is one of the things that it exists only in DeFi or in DeFi tech, and doesn't exist in TradFi, but TradFi can adopt this technology and also provide this optionality to its users.
Yeah, of course, atomic transactions and all those type of things are good and nice. I would say they are an update to what you could find in traditional finance. But for me, what's really different in this crypto blockchain space is the fact that anyone in the world can build any type of technology without asking permissions to a third-party authority. For me, when I was developing in the programming back then in the Web2 world, if you had to build something with SMS, you had to reach out to Twilio, send an email, asking for permission, asking for API token. Token, nothing to do with crypto, just token to access the API. And then you had the few different services that you could send SMS, you could connect, but then those systems that couldn't talk to each other. Well, here in DeFi, you have DeFi Lego. And the fact that you can build a system without asking anyone permission to build from anywhere in the world without any borders, the scale of exposure to the amount of developers and people that you can reach out is unlimited. So that's why we are seeing this speed of innovations, is because anyone with any background, any type of schools, they're coming from any type of countries, they can start building some of the tools that will completely disrupt society in the future or short term. For example, Curve Finance, Uniswap, PowerSwap, all those different projects, they were built by a small team without necessarily asking anyone if they could actually build. And now they are connecting between each other. And now with the beauty of the different blockchain, you can connect, bridge. So you build something, but then later the story continues without you necessarily being involved. And people can carry on, can build on top, and can also like fork it or whatever. So this is the beauty of it. You cannot really stop it.
Yeah, 100%. It's something that's kind of harped on or maybe saturated, but you cannot underestimate the power of being open source, having composability, and frankly, I just call it, a disinfectant force to the point where anyone can get in there, analyze these systems, better understand maybe their nuances, potential snafus, and make them more robust. And I think, to your point, Luigi, a lot of the legacy rails, I broadly characterize them as something of sticky gum and bubble tape, just holding everything together, and everyone's white knuckling it, which is fair. But Julien, you brought up sort of permissioned in perhaps contrast to permissionless. We'll get to that in just a moment. But revisiting sort of the opportunity space in DeFi, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on what hasn't been built to date, or maybe what hasn't been launched if teams are indeed building it, and sort of how does that fit into what you're building, what you're deploying, what you're thinking through, and how does that enable both institutions and sort of the permission route, but then what's missing from a permissionless perspective as well? What are sort of the main opportunities? Or have all the primitives been built and now it's a function of maturation, aggregating liquidity, establishing brand names, Lindy effect, and rolling forward in this manner? Would be curious to hear anyone's thoughts.
Well, technology building never stops, either Web 2 or 3. I think one of the first things that come to mind, it's a problem that we're seeing, at least in ParaSwap, is how can we have a decentralized version of the off-chain services? So if you use ParaSwap, you use a lot of other services. They run AWS servers. That also includes full nodes when you use Infura, Alchemy, and all of that, which act as a kind of a central point of failure. So tomorrow, if Jeff Bezos doesn't like DeFi, he can cut all AWS accounts, and DeFi can let's say the front ends and the user-facing services could have a disruption, if not stop. So I think if we can figure out solutions, how we can build decentralized backends or APIs, that I think is going to remove a lot of this kind of central point of failures that we're facing right now.
Yeah, I think in terms of products, I don't think all the primitives have been built. Finance is inherently complex, right? It's not necessarily a retail. I think a lot of DeFi doesn't think of it this way, but at least I do. I don't think it's necessarily a retail type of offering. There are, payments can be retail. Simple trading can be retail, potentially perpetuals. But when we get into things like structured products, structured credit, credit default swaps, different types of complex options, that's what I guess traditional finance focuses all its time on. When I was working at a bank, the spot markets were really not where we made any money at all. It was really on all the derivatives markets, all in the structured products markets, and we haven't built many of those in DeFi at all. And part of that's because, you need to set the primitives first. I agree with Julien, like the composable part will probably enable more interesting things to be built on the structured side over time. But we probably need more developers, and we need more developers with the financial acumen. And I think that'll start to sort of propel a little bit further.
Yeah, I think Mounir made a fantastic point that innovation never stops. And Luigi, you're absolutely correct as well, in that it really is in the derivative space where Tradfi shines, where most of the money's made. And if you look at the outstanding amount of derivatives in Tradfi, it's what, in the tens of trillions or something in total value. And if you look at decentralized markets, we have almost nothing. There are good products being built, but they're complex to price. They're difficult to learn if you're a retail investor, and there has to be more development in the DeFi ecosystem overall for those things to really take root. So I do agree that I don't think all of the primitives have been built, but I do think that all of the basic financial activities are more or less doable on some decentralized ecosystem. You can swap, you can send, you can borrow, and you can hedge risk, and then also increase leverage as well. Those are kind of the basic things you need to do for finance overall. But given the the multifaceted nature of blockchain finance, there's so much more that can be built over time.
Yeah, exactly. I think that the true evolution was the blockchain, the mechanism of consensus and being able to distribute transaction worldwide without having a third party to can guarantee the securitization of the network. This is really what disrupt compared to Web 2 and create Web 3. But since then, if you really look at what we've been building, and no offense to the people involved in those different products, but for example, us, auto market making is just the fact of automations on market making, but the job of market makers is pretty whole job. It's from traditional finance, lending, the same, credits, options, derivatives, all those different type of things. They are primitive to financial world, but they are not true revolutions. They are not true innovative ideas. What we need, and I think what we can, and we cannot underestimate the Web 2 power, because recently ChatGPT and AI actually bigger buzz than blockchain or crypto. But I think the financial world has been failing over and over because of those different concepts that we've been using over and over. I think with the tool that we have access to right now, we can think about something that is completely different, new type of primitives, and not always replicate the same type of primitive that traditional finance has been using, credit risk and whatever. And it's time that we think about something that can be built as new. Blockchain is more than 10 years old. Is it possible that we build something that is completely different from traditional finance and will actually solve real problems in society? That's a real question.
All right, Julien with the heat. Well, I think that kind of gets to the crux of the conversation, at least in my opinion. And granted, there's a lot of nuance. It's never black or white. It's never permissioned or permissionless. As an industry, generally, we want to be taking shots on goal on all of these ideas at the same time, right? But to get into sort of the topic of permissioned versus permissionless, what excites you most? What do you think is the most immediate term? We each have distinct vantage points, pursuing distinct goals, I would say, all with the same mission overall. But do you think it's best for us to pursue onboarding institutions who have millions and billions of users and servicing their needs, which of course, presents to the room legal and regulatory questions, and we don't, again, need to get into that unless you'd like to. Or is it going more of the permissionless route? And just as an example, maybe onboarding emerging markets. And to Julien's point, maybe it's alternative payment rails to start, but maybe there's new structured products or new functionality in general that hasn't existed to date. I know it's a broad question, but given from where we all sit, I'd love to just pose the question in terms of which one are you perhaps pursuing, more closely? What do you think's the most immediate term catalyst? And longer term, of course, we'll get to both, but yeah, where do you think things lie in those regards?
That was like 15 questions.
15 questions. Get to it, Luigi.
So I think there's a lot there, and then for us, it's a particularly important question because of sort of what we're pursuing and what we're building at Ava Labs, and particularly with the Avalanche architecture. But in general, like I think I mentioned a few times, but I do think there's this sort of path where we go down the DeFi route, and that's going to be for a segment of the world population. But once again, I don't think that my grandma in Italy is ever going to be doing structured credit products on chain. Like, this is not going to happen. So interesting ways to do payments and different types of way to swap assets permissionally. Yeah, that's definitely something that retail can leverage. But if we do want to sort of take a piece or upgrade financial market infrastructure, the existing one, we will need to bring in the institutions. You don't just disintermediate, a lot of the brain power that exists in traditional finance. You don't do that very quickly. They are very strong from a traditional finance perspective. They have a lot of, resources poured into algorithms. I know Julien's probably got some thoughts on this. But in order to get them to actually provide their liquidity, their clients' liquidity into these products, you need to do something that they can access. So, my team, and then obviously other parts of the Ava Labs team, spends a lot of time talking to banks all over the world, in the US, large buy-side asset managers. We've recently announced what we call Spruce, which is a testnet, a subnet, that allows for KYC at the chain level and allows for permissionless DeFi apps to deploy within that KYC'd environment. And there are institutions, the few that were named were Wellington, Wisdom Tree, and T. Rowe Price, which are some of the largest trillion-dollar-plus buy-side asset managers in the US, are going to be accessing, leveraging, and using these DeFi rails. So far, like Aave, I think, is deployed, and there's a few others, Dexalot. And they're going to test the functionality on from an operational perspective and an execution perspective versus some of the traditional sort of execution layers. And hopefully we'll put out research and thoughts on whether or not this is possible to upgrade into a mainnet. But a lot of the time we've kind of had all these 2017 boomer-esque, like, blockchain not Bitcoin, all the enterprise stuff happening, but they try to take a whole bite at the apple, right? Like, we're going to upgrade finance in this one chain, this one moment. You can't do it that way. You have to do it step by step, changing the mindset and getting people comfortable with the idea that this technology can actually be better, and you don't have to think of it from the perspective of tokens, value accrual, any of that stuff. It's a technology. And if they look at it from that perspective, I think we have a lot of value to add.
I think if we look at the numbers, it's a pretty interesting question, because we're looking to resolve that question, right? How do we get DeFi to $1 trillion? So the present market cap, according to DeFi Llama, of DeFi overall is about $50 billion in total. So we need about a 20x in terms of TVL to reach $1 trillion, if my math is correct. What's really interesting is that retail activity in the financial markets is at a higher point now than it's ever been historically. If you look back at 2020, there was, I believe, about 20% of all stock market activity, 19.5, was retail traders. That's huge. That's a massive amount for comparatively, undereducated investors to be making all the time. Not to mention the growth that's happened in the options market from retail investors as well. If you look also at 2022, for example, there was about $1 billion a month coming into the traditional financial markets from just retail alone, on average, for the first half of the year. $1 billion for individuals and families who are probably making between 30 to 80K on average, a year. That's a substantial amount of active engagement that's going on. Now, to retail's credit and enthusiasm, the amount of capital that retail investors have to freely spend, and I think what would even more importantly be said, are comfortable spending, is not as, or investing, is not as large as institutions. So this isn't a black and white answer of, will institutions take DeFi to $1 trillion? Absolutely, there's no question about that. But the question then becomes, what impact does retail have? And I think if we can solve the interoperability challenge that plagues the blockchain space, it's getting better now, and the UX challenge that also plague the onboarding process, those two things can be resolved. The amount of activity we're going to see from retail investors is going to be massive, and they're going to make a big dent in that $1 trillion mark.
One analogy I like to think about when we talk about the future of DeFi and adoption is the streaming industry, where we had Napster and torrent protocol that was, it is a decentralized protocol till today, and with a lot of legal challenges and all of that, but which led to have Netflix and Disney Plus and all of that. So crypto, by its nature, is a neutral network, a neutral protocol or set of protocols. But I think by having them being used by large institutions will be at the benefit also of retailers, because simply is going to make access to finance much cheaper than what it is right now. So having institutions is by itself also a bridge to having mass adoption to retail.
Yeah, I believe what we are going to see for the first time over the past 10 years will be available because of two different changes that is currently happening to the blockchain world. Account abstractions that can be used by centralized applications and authorities. And then the second one is secure enclave. So in the coming weeks, we'll see all the different phones in this room that can behave as a wallet, and application can use this phone to provide services in a decentralized way, but also with the securization of not losing money, your key, and also setting up limits about the amount of money I want to be able to approve, the amount of money I want to be able to send. So for the first time over the past 12 years in the blockchain space, you will be able to use DeFi application in the same smooth way that you are doing in the Web2 world. For example, like using Revolut, using Twitter, using Instagram, it would be exactly the same, a seamless way of interacting with those applications without you knowing the complexity of the technology behind and which blockchain you are using or the necessity of having a certain amount of tokens to pay the gas. And this is completely mind-blowing in terms of user onboarding and the ability for TradFi and DeFi to meet and to be able to solve real problems. And this was never possible before, and this is the first time over the past 10 years that this is possible. And I think problems about UX and UI will completely change. You will not even know if this application that you're using is actually using some of the best application of the blockchain industry. And this is a major change that is happening today and right now. So hopefully next year when we do the same panel, we have a completely different problems, maybe about scalability and other different things. But normally onboarding, if you have your phone behave as a wallet and you can use Apple Cloud to back up your key if something happens to your wallet, then it's a game over.
Couldn't agree more. I think, new key management systems via mobile devices, a huge, huge unlock. But then also account abstraction, I think of it broadly as just the scaling of policy engines to the point where businesses, protocols, developers all around the world can just generally better service their users, abstract away the crypto elements, whether or not it's a token used for gas or otherwise signing transactions. There's a whole bunch of nuance in there that frankly can be pulled out of it. But, being mindful of time, perhaps to distill the 15 questions down into one, and I think it, constitutes the time of this year. Can we get to $1 trillion without institutional adoption?
Well, looking on chain already, we have more and more, I would say, I don't know the word in English, but we have more and more users that have built has extracted a lot of value and are bringing millions of dollars in transactions, in liquidity, and that was built by themselves. So if you look at the volumes in DeFi right now, they are mostly produced by degens, by DeFi natives, and it's growing. I remember 4 years ago, we were making a meetup. We were very happy to reach $500 million in DeFi. Before COVID, we celebrated the first $1 billion, and now we are not satisfied with $50 billion. So I think we at least did 100x in 4 years, and we are not far away from reaching $1 trillion just within the DeFi ecosystem, and I believe we should shoot for more than $1 trillion actually.
I think the answer to that question really depends on the value accrual of tokens, because that defines very much like sort of the amount of money that's in the space, given how volatile those are. But in general, like the volumes that you mentioned, in a lot of ways, this isn't even true volume. It's really just arbitrage from centralized exchange to decentralized exchange. So
Still volume.
What?
Still volume.
Still volume, fair enough. You can still report it. But I think I think we can get there, but I think it's capped without institutions.
Yeah, I don't think it's technically impossible, but I think realistically it probably won't happen without institution, or at least some institutional involvement. I know institutions aren't a monolith by any stretch of the imagination, but there has to be deeper liquidity. There has to be, for a lot of people to be comfortable participating in DeFi, more established brands and institutions from the TradFi space, from Wall Street, coming into these ecosystems to make people feel comfortable, because not everybody is as risk-taking and as venturous as most people in this room and listening online likely are. So I think that's something that we need to consider, but it's kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible, first, technically. I kind of agree with, but also I don't think this is what we want. Because what we've seen in the DeFi space and all the different things that are happening in the DeFi space, this is quite dangerous environment for retail to navigate. So the more people we bring without the correct regulation in place and the correct tool to protect those people, it's just impacting this ecosystem, because then we have lack of trust, we have like all the lobbying in the world that criticize the crypto industry. So what we want is the TradFi and DeFi kind of merge and build this hybrid finance that can use the concept of traditional financial world. For example, notary, banking, security, like not custodial solutions, but the institutional way to protect yourself, because DeFi is nice until it breaks. Someone hacked the contract that you were playing with. And 99% of retail people don't know how to use those different concepts. I don't think retail should be able to use options. I mean, they should be able to use, but I don't think they are able to use it because of lack of knowledge. I think you need tools to play for them to be able to hedge, leverage, or do those type of insurance mechanism for them. But I believe we shouldn't reach that trillion cap without having the correct tools in place. Otherwise, we'll replicate what happened over the past 2 years or whatever happened before. CeFi failed, but also DeFi can fail in many different ways because a lot of different people build bad projects, and retail tends to play with those bad projects. So we need to find the correct way to building and help each other in order to secure those different applications for retail.
Well, I agree that $1 trillion is a very achievable bar, and we'll get there. So hopefully the next panel is 10 trillion, and we'd love to have you guys back next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron.